Shalom, and welcome to our show, The Crossover, a show aimed at bridging gaps between Jews and Christians. Today we have a special guest on our show, Dr. William Bean, and we're going to be discussing the 20th century's most important archaeological find, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Because Dr. Bean is a professor and a pastor and a Bible teacher, he's going to focus on the effect of the Dead Sea Scrolls on the New Testament.
For nearly 2,000 years, Jews and Christians have been divided. But now, God is calling for the healing of past hurts and the comforting of His people. Discover how God is prophetically uniting Jews and Christians across the world today on The Crossover. And now, here are your hosts, Mitch and Rosalie.
These Dead Sea Scrolls are the oldest copies of the Bible yet known to man. They are more than 1,000 years older than any others now in existence. Dr. William Bean is a Dead Sea Scrolls advisor and executive director of the Center of the Study of Biblical Research in Redlands, California. He has been leading tours to Israel for more than 30 years, and he is one of only a few people to interview the shepherd boy who discovered these scrolls in the caves of Qumran by the Dead Sea. Dr. William Bean has spent a lifetime as a pastor, educator, and Bible teacher, and he has been intensely interested in the Hebraic background to the New Testament and has recently authored the book New Treasures, a perspective of the New Testament teachings through Hebraic eyes. He also writes for Illustrated Bible Life and Restore magazines. A credentialed teacher, he lectures at the college and seminary level in the United States and Israel. Here's Dr. Bean and Mitch. Enjoy.
Dr. Bean, welcome to The Crossover.
Thank you very much.
Glad to have you on our show. Again, The Crossover is a show bridging gaps between Jews and Christians. And just to start us off, your life is very diversified here in different arenas, but what are you doing to help bridge that gap?
Well, we're working throughout the country. One, basically, for people to understand who are Christians, more of the mother faith from which Christianity came. At Greenville College, Greenville, Illinois, we have a program of Judaic-Christian studies sponsored by the Shapiro Foundation, a Jewish organization. And in California, we have a graduate program for pastors. These pastors are studying each week. Presently, we just finished the first semester with 20 pastors that represent 18,000 people. Well, these pastors are beginning to make testimonies like, I have to re-examine my own faith. I have to begin looking into the scriptures in a deeper relationship with the Jewish faith to have a greater understanding. So anything to break down the walls of anti-Semitism is very important to us because we do have a relationship.
Absolutely. And we have share the same God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
That's right.
Well, Dr. Bean, to share here again on the scrolls, we've done one segment with you before, but for viewers maybe that didn't see that, just bring us back to what are the Dead Sea Scrolls, their discovery, their importance in today's world.
The Dead Sea Scrolls, before the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest document we had of the Old Testament, we call the Old Testament, which is the First Testament, was the Masoretic text, and the oldest copy dated back to 1008 AD or CE, the Common Era. And before that, there was nothing earlier.
Okay.
And now we are catapulted, as I mentioned before, back to 1,200 years earlier, to where we have documents, 90% of the Bible, in Hebrew, that we can use to verify the validity of even the First Testament.
Wow. Well, that's phenomenal. And from that, what this show is going to do is we want to show the effects that the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls have had onto the Second Testament, or the New Testament, as Christians would call it today. And because most of in fact, all of the Dead Sea Scrolls were Old Testament or First Testament discoveries. But you wrote a whole book here called New Treasures, and you must have a lot to say here, because what you're about to share with us is how they've affected the New Testament, which, if I heard you say earlier, there aren't any documents from the New Testament that were discovered back in the Dead Sea Scrolls, etc.
Absolutely. However, one of our earliest Bibles from Mount Sinai, does have the New Testament. It dates back to about the 4th century, and we have a few codices that have the New Testament. However, what we try to do at the Center for the Study of Biblical Research, one of the other irons in the fire that I have, besides working with the Dead Sea Scrolls Foundation, is New Testament research. But we try to be very, what we call in Christianity, cultural-centric, language-centric, Jesus-centric. Let's go back to the period of time and study from that period of time. What language did these people speak? What were their cultures? What were their customs? And what were their idiomatic phrases?
This would be interesting.
Yes.
Why don't you start us with the cover here, because your cover is interesting in itself. What language is this, and what is this that we're looking at?
This is the Bar Kokhba letter. This dates back to the Bar Kokhba revolt in 1936, 1937. It's an interesting find because this is a general letter written in Ivrit, in Hebrew. Not in Aramaic, not in Greek, but in Hebrew. And what's interesting about this particular statement is it has what we call a colloquialism or slang. We say in English, how you doing? Not how are you doing, or excuse me, not excuse me. Young people come up with these colloquials. Even in Israel today, to say goodbye to someone in Hebrew, you'd say lehitrot. Well, the young people would just say traot, bye. And now they say bye-bye. That's actually Hebrew.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Well, the Bar Kokhba letter, if I might open this book, has this particular...
Just tell our people for a second who Bar Kokhba was.
Oh, Bar Kokhba was the leader of the Second Jewish Revolt after the temple was destroyed in about 136 A.D. And Rabbi Akiva, the great rabbi, claimed that Bar Kokhba, but his name is really Bar Kosba. We found that in this letter. Bar Kokhba was claimed, or he acknowledged that he was the Messiah. So everyone was going to follow him except for the believers in Jesus that went to Petra.
Right.
Now, in this letter, we find this colloquialism. It actually reads, Shalom me'id ani elai tashmaim. In English, it's peace, shalom. I take heaven, and then it goes, as my witness against me. But what's interesting is this third line, Shalom me'id ani alai tashmaim. Originally, it should read, Shalom me'id ani alai et hashamayim. But what Bar Kokhba did, he dropped the aleph and the hey out, moved the tet over, and performed a colloquialism, as we would say in English, to heavens. Not the heavens, to heavens. Now, the important thing about this discovery is that it would be unable for you to write this, a colloquial or slang, unless you have a spoken language. So it shows us that even back in 132, there was more Hebrew spoken than what we realized. And that's a very important discovery for us. As I said before, yes, Jesus spoke Aramaic, Jesus spoke Hebrew, probably Greek, probably knew Latin. But I think that he taught basically a lot in the Hebrew language. That's the important thing. Aramaic and Hebrew are
So
sort of
from
like...
a Hebrew language, it would be a slang. And
Right.
in other words, there would be, that's what you're getting
That's
at
correct. Hebrew and Aramaic are like Portuguese and Spanish. If you know one, you
can
sort
kinda
of
get
know the
through.
other. A little bit, not much. And today, the Hebrew you have today, the block letters are actually Aramaic letters to begin with.
Okay.
And part of our, what we call the Old Testament, and part of the Tanakh, Daniel chapter 7, is written completely in Aramaic.
So did Hebrew come from Aramaic, Aramaic from Hebrew, or?
It all derives from what we call a Semitic language of that time. It goes way back. Aramaic is one of the most ancient languages. Dates way back, and we can almost go all the way back to Abraham with some type of Semitic language.
Okay. So when we can now go back to like the Hebrew and like Isaiah, the scrolls here, and now not have to go through a layer of translation through Greek, but go back to the original source, we're going to be picking up different idioms or phrases
That's right.
or expressions that will have brought new life to the scriptures, which we would have missed before.
That's correct.
And if I remember, you've been a pastor for 20, how many years?
28 years.
So are there any examples here of when you were pastoring, teaching on a topic like many pastors maybe do, and then all of a sudden after this discovery saying, whoa, that wasn't as accurate as I had hoped, and here, now it's coming more to light. Any examples like that?
Have you ever heard someone say, if it's not in the Bible, I don't want to know about it?
Oh, I'm sure I have.
But if we could find something outside the Bible that would tell us and explain an idiom, I'd sure want to know about it. And an example is Jesus said, if your eye is good or if your eye is bad. A good eye, ayin tovah, a bad eye, ayin ra'ah. They're mentioned in the Tanakh, but they're not interpreted. It actually means if your eye is good, tov, or if your eye is stingy. Basically, even today in modern Hebrew, they say in Israel, this is going to be the week of the National Cancer Drive of Israel, have a good eye, be generous. However, we take it back further than that. We go back to the intertestamental period, the pseudepigrapha, for example, the unknown authors. And in the book of the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, in the Testament of Benjamin and Issachar, we find the following in regard to this idiomatic phrase of good eye. It basically states there, if your eye is single. Now, the word good is not even in the original Greek eclectic text, so we know it's not good. Even though that's used today, it's partially correct, generosity, if your eye is generous. However, it says, and translated it into English, it says, let your eye be single. For example, it tells us that two eyes represents Satan. It is of Satan. In other words, don't say
Represents.
Satan himself, Hasatan, the devil.
Yes.
In other words, don't say one thing here and say something over here, or don't hear one thing here or hear something over here. But the single eye is the inner disposition of the individual. It's your inner self. So basically, it's an idiomatic phrase. How would you translate into Spanish, for example, it's raining cats and dogs? Literally, if you translated it, they'd go outside and look for the cats and dogs coming down.
Right.
Well, this is what we're able to do. We're able to take these idiomatic phrases and find them and what Jesus meant by them. And Jesus was saying, if your inner disposition is good, your whole body will be filled with this.
But this was found in the scrolls, even though it wasn't interpreted at that level. But
well, they're not scrolls. The parts of them were found at Qumran, but it was scrolls that were written during the intertestamental period.
Okay.
But if you are a saturnine individual, I mean evil disposition, then your whole body will be full of that, and that makes more sense to me than just. I always wondered when I was a young pastor, which eye?
Yeah.
If your eye is good. Or if your eye is bad. And James speaks of double-mindedness.
Exactly. And this is Matthew 6:22 that Dr. Bean is mentioning here.
Right.
We're going to cut away for a second. We're going to come back, Dr. Bean, and take us through some other phrases, expressions that will bring more meaning to us. But we just want our viewers to take a second and look at some other shows that we have for the crossover that we want you to view here for the next minute.
We will be right back.
I'm Jim Becca. I've been a journalism teacher for many years, and actually I wrote my first newspaper story in 1973. And I've seen the world change a whole lot in that time, covering a lot of different stories. But one thing that upsets me a little bit, and this is what I teach my students, is that truth can never be bested by falsehood in the public arena. But what happens when so much of what you see in the media is not the truth? And it's overbearingly, blatantly bad or anti-good. And that's why I was really concerned. That's why I think that the crossover can be a powerful instrument in reaching people, because it's actually proclaiming the truth, the positive side of a lot of different things, and reaching out to people.
For nearly 2,000 years, Jews and Christians have been divided. But now, God is calling for the healing of past hurts and the comforting of His people. Discover how God is prophetically uniting Jews and Christians across the world today on The Crossover. The crossover exists to communicate to the Jewish community that there is a growing group of Christians who love them unconditionally. The focus of the Crossover program is to promote a greater understanding of the differences and similarities between Jewish and Christian customs, history, and theology, while encouraging a closer walk with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As a second-generation Holocaust survivor, Rosalie's Jewish heritage includes parents who were protected from the Nazis by Christians. Yet for more than a decade, Mitch and Rosalie searched for meaning in life in the New Age movement. But after returning to their Judeo-Christian roots, they discovered God's purpose for their lives: to rebuild bridges between Christians and Jews. Now through TV, radio, the internet, speaking engagements, the healing room, and print and video resources, they are reuniting Jews and Christians in fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Join Mitch and Rosalie as they tackle tough topics and welcome dynamic guests on The Crossover.
They're one of the few organizations that actually understands the background of why Jesus did what he did, because they're from a similar background, and that's what the world really wants at this particular time.
For more information on The Crossover and The Crossover Project, contact Rosalie Jerome at 832-287-5057 or visit us on the web at www.thecrossovertv.org.
Lord God of Abraham, Isaac and Israel.
Welcome back to The Crossover.
Welcome back to The Crossover, and we're with Dr. Bean, and we're talking on his book here, The New Treasures and Perspective of the New Testament Teachings Through Hebraic Eyes. And Dr. Bean, sometimes the Pharisees sort of get knocked a lot and condemned a lot. Mm-hmm. And is there any misunderstanding or cultural misunderstanding maybe through the ages that would change that?
Yes, there were, I was trying to find it here in the book, there were 7 orders of the Pharisees in the days of Jesus. Jesus basically, even in his teachings, used a hermeneutical study of Rabbi Hillel. There's the 7 midot of Rabbi Hillel. But also,
and what does that mean to our viewers?
It's a way of interpretation, like when Jesus uses the phrase, how much more.
Okay.
This is a hermeneutical interpretation that the Jewish people used.
Okay.
There were 7 orders of the Pharisees, and these names were given to them by outsiders. Like the Hebrew name Ivrit was given by outsiders. The Christian name Christian was given by outsiders, and outsiders gave these names. There was one Pharisee called the Bloody Nose Pharisee. This Pharisee was worried that he might look upon a woman, so he always walked with his head down. He was so pious, but he would run into a post or run into a wall, and they called him the Bloody Nose Pharisee. But there was also called the Shoulder Pharisee, and in Matthew 23, woe unto you scribes and Pharisees, woe unto you scribes and Pharisees. This was the Shoulder Pharisee. In Hebrew, Shoulder Shechem, or the village of Shechem, that's where they originated from, means those Pharisees that place their burdens upon other people's shoulders. So basically all of Matthew 23 is against this one particular Pharisee. They were basically outside they looked like whited sepulchres, but inside they were old dry bones. But we have to also realize there were people like Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, and these were probably the God-loving Pharisee. There's another order of Pharisee. There was the ever-reckoning Pharisee, or wait a little Pharisee, the shoulder Pharisee, the bleeding Pharisee, the fearful Pharisee. And also what a lot of people don't realize is during the days of Jesus, there were 2 schools of thought. There was the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. So what we try to do in our work is acquaint pastors, especially, and laity, in the background from whence the New Testament came.
And with that, let's look at, let's go back here to Psalm 22 as a very strong example. Viewers really listen to this, because this is a very well-known psalm in churches, and King David, I believe, is the author here, and this goes back about 1,000 years, I believe, before Jesus was on the earth. And this is a psalm that, for people who don't know, really talks about his crucifixion. Now, but a lot of the rabbinical Jewish rabbis do not seem to hold that view here. And why don't you share with us what you've learned from the scrolls that have been discovered and studied, and how do they now bring to light Psalm 22 and like you've been showing us before?
I feel that Jesus preached one of the greatest sermons from the cross. He used a form of what we call remez, which means to allude or refer back, to make an inference back to a particular passage. He did this all through his teaching, and when he said, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, or azabnati is the way it is in Psalm 22, in Ivrit, he was just alluding the people back to this total psalm.
Now, is that the first line that you were just
Yes,
reading in,
uh-huh.
my God, why have you forsaken me?
Right.
And that language you just said it
was in Hebrew.
Okay.
If it had been in Aramaic, it'd be Eloi, Eloi, and in Aramaic that only means God, does not mean Eliyahu, Elijah. So we feel that possibly he was at the cross was speaking Hebrew. But I'm not an advocate of that. However, in Psalm 22, verse 16, and in verse 17 in the Masoretic text, there has been a debate over whether this is ka'ari or ka'ari or ka'aru or ka'aru, ka'ari or ka'aru. The same root word in both, but ka'ari actually means ke, like, ari, lion. Ka'aru actually is a verb. It's a hiphil verb. It means to dig into. And the difference between the three consonants is the last consonant. Is it a yud? You know, a yud is a very small letter. Or is it a vav?
Okay. And isn't the yud the smallest letter, Hebrew letter?
The smallest in the Hebrew alphabet. And so does it mean, a matter of fact, you can open up an interlinear Bible with Hebrew and Greek that we use in Christianity. And it has English in Hebrew and Greek in English. And it says ke'ari, like a lion, in Hebrew, but underneath it says pierce. It's really misleading to Christian ministers.
Okay. Yes.
So what is it? Well, the Septuagint says that my hands are pierced. But again, when we look at the form here, people don't trust this version or the ancient versions that come forth or from so forth. So there's been a debate between Christianity and Judaism. I don't want to go into that, but I usually go with text, how the text is read. I don't think it takes away from either faith. I just think that we need to understand a little bit more about this. Now, at
should we read the text for our viewers
why
here
don't you
so
read the text
they can
we're
hear what we're
talking
talking
about?
about, right?
Right.
This is an extremely well-known verse. This is Psalm 22, verse 16. For dogs have compassed me, the assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. And then the next verse, I may tell all my bones, they look and stare upon me.
That's correct.
So the controversy here is that word pierced, if I'm understanding you correctly.
That's right.
Some of the the rabbis are saying, well, it doesn't mean pierced, it means lion. But the actual source, when you went back to the Hebrew here, you discovered it means
Well, we
pierced, or what was the other word you used?
or to dig into. We discovered at Nahal, which is wadi in Arabic, a wadi, Nahal in Hebrew, Nahal Hever, H-E-V-E-R. Psalms, it's listed as 5. We found this particular fragment with Psalm 22. And if you look at it carefully, this is the only copy. It took me 6 months. It's mentioned in our Dead Sea Scrolls Bible. But I had to write to Israel, and one of our scholars had to send it to me, and I just received it the other day. It was discovered just a few years ago, but this is Psalm 22. And if you look carefully here, scholars have to look under a microscope, basically, to see this. But we have here karu. The aleph wasn't used. They didn't use the aleph in that way. So you'll notice right here, this is a vav. It's not a yud. It's the full length of the resh. Karu yadai. Hands. So basically it reads karu. Well, if it's karu or ka'aru, it means, again, it's a hiphil verb, and it means they have dug into and pierced.
And you said this was a more recent discovery
Right,
from this,
right.
Meaning how many?
Well,
far-
when we say recent, maybe within the last 10 years or so.
So I think I read you have 65 scholars that actually are able to get to these scrolls and study and do this analytical research. And
65 scholars were working on putting everything together. And they had a 2-year period to put everything together. And what's
and this
happening-
just surfaced recently.
Oh, yes. What's happening with a lot of these fragments, first of all, is we were unable to read them, and now all of a sudden they're coming alive.
Yes.
And we're finding these different phrases and the exact wording and so forth like that.
So Dr. Bean, you think we can just rip out the middle page here, which separates the First Testament from the Second Testament, and just call it one book?
Well, we should call it one Bible. The Jewish people don't agree with the Christian people that the New Testament is a canon Bible. However, when you say New Testament in Hebrew, it's Berit HaKadashah. It actually means a renewal of. And what it comes down to basically is this. We both believe in the same God. We both believe that there's a Messiah to come. They're looking for a Messiah differently than Christianity is looking for a Messiah. But we have to look at the fact and have people realize that Christianity developed out of Judaism. And the beginnings of Christianity even started before Jesus came into the world. It started back in the intertestamental period, to where eschatology was being studied, end times. The Essenes, who were Jewish, were studying a lot about end times.
Really?
And the New Testament writers, Christianity is an eschatological religion. So I think what has happened over the years is that the church has lost some of its contact from the culture and the language. And what we need to do is go back, not that we have to change or anything like that, but to understand more about where we came from.
Well, what I sense you're doing, Dr. Bean, is bringing us more from analytical to relationship building with,
That's right.
with our God.
Right.
And bringing the religions together. Just like you said, there is only one God. Well, we unfortunately are out of time, but we sure appreciate you bringing the actual, the scrolls on the parchment and all the knowledge that you have, and hopefully we've done enough justice that people will be able to pick your book up and really get into it in depth and get more knowledge. We appreciate you coming. Thank you for
very
spending
much.
time. And now back to Rosalie.
We hope that you enjoyed today's program, and for those of you who would like more information about the Dead Sea Scrolls, you can contact Dr. William Bean at www.csbr.net. We hope you'll tune into the crossover next week. Shalom.
Join Mitch and Rosalie as they reach an ever-growing worldwide audience through the crossover. We invite you to become a crossover partner right now by calling the number on your screen. For your monthly gift of $30 or more, you will receive the Crossover Partnership Pack, which includes a DVD of today's program, a personal greeting and prayer message from Mitch and Rosalie, more information about the Crossover Project. As you continue to support the Crossover each month, you will receive a new Crossover DVD, a monthly ministry report, and your name will be added to the Healing Room.